Matching outfits, extravagant birthdays, many nicknames, few classic moves of a dog-obsessed parent. And at Ollie, they're obsessed with how obsessed you are with your pup, which is why they obsess over giving your dog the best. Ollie's fresh human-grade recipes are developed by real chefs and backed by vet nutritionists. The meals are perfectly proportioned and come with a pup-tainer and a scoop for easy storing and mess-free serving, delivering the best experience for you and your pup. And through the Ollie app, you can actually check in on your dog's health with real vets. By uploading a picture, their team can check your dog's weight, digestion, teeth, and coat. They'll then provide next steps on how to keep them thriving. And because they're just as obsessed as you are, there's zero judgment if you check in every day. You could say Ollie feeds the obsession. Go to ollie.com/truecrime and use the code TRUECRIME to get 60% off your welcome kit. Ollie, feed the obsession.
Hi, I'm Juliet Cowley, a retired FBI profiler and host of the true crime podcast, The Consult, Real FBI Profilers. If you're fascinated with true crime and criminal profiling, then join us as we discuss real cases and examine the behavior exhibited before, during, and after the commission of the crime. You can listen to The Consult wherever you get your podcasts. It's as close as it gets to being in the room with the FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit.
I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors. Today on the Prosecutors, we talk John Reginald Christie. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this episode of The Prosecutors. I'm Brett, and I'm joined, as always, by my brilliant co-host, Alice.
Brett, it only took 5.5 years for you to say the obvious.
Well, in England, they call everything brilliant, so I felt like it was a good time to do that.
And it is about time that we use, hey. You know, you try to be nice. I try to be nice, and then that strikes. What I was going to say is it's about time that we gave our English brethren their own case. And boy, is it a crazy case. I don't know if you want to be aligned in country with this case, because boy, is this one crazy.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about Timothy Evans last week and, you know, this murder that he committed, which seems somewhat straightforward, but then his bizarre confessions, which draw in this other gentleman, this John Reginald Christie. And then, as we said, you know, Timothy, he's convicted. Very swift justice. He's executed a couple months later, and there the story ends. And yet, here we are. Why are we here? What's left to talk about in this case? I think we're kind of done with this.
And why are we talking about someone who isn't the one who was convicted?
We're just going to really go into depth about his testimony and how important it was. So, okay. Yes. So we are going to talk more about the chief witness in the Timothy Evans murder case, John Reginald Christie. And you may recall, Christie, he's the downstairs neighbor. He's a former police officer. He's a clerk during World War II. He's a medical guy. He's helping people. And he and his wife are downstairs. They hear this weird noise during the midst of this knockdown, drag-out fight between the Evans. Then there's no more sound. They never see Beryl again. She ends up dead. They find her body and the body of their year-old baby, Geraldine, in one of the outbuildings behind the apartments. And Christie, unwittingly, all of a sudden gets drawn into this because after the first confession by Evans, from that point forward, well, the second confession is all about Christie. He says Christie was helping his wife have an abortion. She then died, and they had to cover it up. Third confession, Christie's not really in at all. In that confession, it's much more sort of They got into a fight. He strangled his wife. He strangled his daughter. He put them in the back area, and then he left. Fourth confession, he's back to Christie. That Christie killed his wife. He's not really sure what happened to his daughter. She just kind of disappeared. It's very strange.
But it wasn't an abortion gone bad. It was a straight up, he just murdered his wife.
Yes. So that's the situation. So we're going to take a little bit harder look at John Reginald Christie today, and we will start with his birth. He was born April 8th, 1899 in Halifax, Yorkshire, England. He was the youngest of 5 children and the only boy. Despite his father being a strict disciplinarian, he had a seemingly normal childhood. He sang in the local choir, participated in the Boy Scouts. He left school at age 15 and worked as a projectionist in a local movie theater. He served in World War I as a signalman until he was injured by mustard gas, and he lost his ability to speak for 3 years. Interestingly, doctors really couldn't point to a medical reason why. Now, World War I was incredibly traumatic. The gas attacks were incredibly traumatic. You can imagine this is just some sort of shell shock / trauma. They didn't really understand PTSD and everything else back then, but this was a pretty horrific event. He gets through it. It takes him 3 years to speak again. In 1920, he married Ethel Waddington. This was shortly after his speech returned. And he was described as quiet and inconspicuous, just sort of a normal guy. And Ethel was described as sentimental and passive. So they have just a very sort of low-key relationship. Now, some speculated that Ethel was afraid of her husband and did whatever he said, but the general feeling was that they were just an ordinary, pleasant couple. And frankly, Christie seemed pretty reserved. He doesn't come across as a sort of overbearing husband. He doesn't come across as someone who bossed his wife around. If anything, he seems kind of meek and passive. And that is what everyone thinks who just sees them together. But behind closed doors, things were a little different. And their marriage was described as a difficult one. So Christie had an affinity for hiring sex workers, and he had had several run-ins with the law. And just a few years into their marriage, when he was 25 years old, he actually left Ethel and moved to London while she remained in Sheffield.
Kind of a big one. We've been talking about how he's kind of a mild-mannered seeming guy who didn't speak for 3 years. But his vice is kind of a big one, especially in the 1920s, hiring sex workers. And as you'll see, that's probably the least offensive thing he's going to do. This has nothing to do with the story whatsoever, but did you know that when it came down to my name, my parents were going to name me Alice or Ethel?
Really?
And I only know
they
this.
They chose wisely. No offense.
I think so too. I think so too. Although I do love Ethel from I Love Lucy. And that's why they liked the name Ethel. I found a baby book from the year I was born. And in it were 2 names highlighted. And it was Alice and Ethel. And I was like, are these the 2 names? And it was indeed. So I could have been an Ethel. Could have been my co-host, Ethel. But instead it's Alice. So we're just talking about an Ethel. So that is kind of the seemingly normal start of John Christie's life. Now, April 12th, 1921, John Reginald Christie, he gets a job as a postman, which is, again, a pretty regular, respectable job. Not long after, though, he was sentenced to 3 months of prison for stealing hundreds of pounds of postal orders.
And these are pounds like the money, not the weight.
Yeah. Either way, if it were like pounds of mail, that's a lot of mail, but it was money. And by the way, this is very annoying. We have a horrible epidemic across the country, current day, of postal worker. Well, we suspect it's postal workers, and many of them are postal workers, but mail being stolen, and we just can't prosecute it enough. That's just I don't know if that's a hot tip. I guess if you went into that field, you can go for it. But it's I will just hear from entire neighborhoods where it's just known that your mail is stolen, and they think it's postal workers because it never hits the mailbox. It's
right.
kind of taken beforehand. So This is kind of a century-old crime, shall we say.
if you're going to mail anything today in the United States and it's worth anything, put some insurance on it.
Yeah, unfortunately.
A lot of times, and we see this a lot because of our positions, former and current, but we know where it got stolen. Can't say who did it, but we know, like, for instance, it went to the Atlanta sorting facility and disappeared there. So it wasn't stolen by someone like a porch pirate. It wasn't stolen out of the mailbox. It made it into the mail system, goes to one of the big sorting places and disappears.
And then you'll see really, like all of the checks that get sent to that mail sorting system between the hours of 10 and 12 a.m. In other words, during a certain shift, they're gone. And
you got to be really careful, like checks. If you're still doing checks, they can wash checks so easily. So just, as Al said, didn't really have anything to do with this case, but been going on for a while, still going on today.
And that's exactly what John was doing. Got this respectable job, but immediately started abusing it. Was just stealing money from the mail, and he only gets 3 months. I mean, 300 pounds is not small potatoes here, but he gets kind of a slap on the wrist here. So fast forward a couple of years, living his life now. He gets out of jail, just a regular guy in town. September 1924, so 3 years after that slap on the wrist for stealing postal orders, John Christie is sentenced to 9 months this time in Uxbridge jail on 2 charges of theft. So still kind of his old thing, still stealing over here. Then kind of nothing. 5 years later, May 1929, Christie still has this affinity for hiring sex workers, but he doesn't just hire them. This time, he hits a prostitute that he had been living with over the head with a cricket bat, and he was sentenced to 6 months of hard labor for this violent crime. So it's no longer theft. Now we're kind of moving into the physical violent crime. And by the way, I don't know if I want to sentence someone who is violent to hard labor to get stronger.
Especially hitting somebody with a cricket bat. I mean, that's a deadly attack. You know, I mean, I'm not going to say it's attempted murder because that goes to intent, but that's a serious assault. It just goes to show, I mean, it just always amazes. I mean, we often think of like, oh, we have soft sentences now and they were so much harder back in the day. And in some ways they were, but the fact that you could whack somebody over the head with a cricket bat and get 6 months, I don't know, that tells you something. And especially when you have this criminal history that's building up. I mean, this is not his first offense. And it's interesting to see him, you know, the first 2 offenses are relatively white collar, they're non-violent, and now all of a sudden he's whacking people in the head with a cricket bat.
I'll say that's a pretty intense jump. It doesn't seem like there was an escalation. It went from like stealing mail that you're handling to serious assault here. So that's in 1929. 1933. Note that there's a good amount of time in between. It's not like he goes back out on the street and immediately reoffends. He continues just to live this kind of regular life, part of society. Several years go in between these different charges that he's hit with. But in 1933, he's sent back to prison for 3 more months. This time, he's back to his old, I guess, habit of stealing. But now it's escalated. No longer is it postal orders. He is actually sent to prison for stealing a car from a priest.
I mean, I don't know if that makes it worse, but it certainly seems worse, right?
I don't think it's better. It's certainly not better.
Yeah.
So after he left prison, Christie reached back out to his estranged wife, Ethel. Now, the two reconciled, and after 10 years separated, she moved back in with him in London. But despite this reconciliation, Christie's behavior didn't change. He continued to hire sex workers to fulfill his not just sexual urges, but violent sexual urges.
So that brings us to December 1938. And this is when John and Ethel move into 10 Rillington Place in the Ladbroke Grove neighborhood of Notting Hill. So he has now moved into the apartment where the rest of this story is going to take place. And wouldn't you know it, he's turned over a new leaf. He's turned his life around so completely that he applies to join the police. And what do you know what? They hire him. They hire him, and he is assigned to the Harrow Road station after they failed to notice his criminal record during recruitment. I mean, they didn't have computers back then. I guess it was a little bit harder to do a background check.
It's kind of an extensive one, though. Like extensive criminal background.
Yeah. I mean, now you may remember we mentioned this earlier that Christie, he actually will lose his job after he testifies in that trial because all of this does come back to haunt him, all these convictions. Now, at the time of the trial, it had been 17 years since his last conviction. But despite that, when they find out about this history, he is going to lose his job with the police department, at least. But anyways, he's got a job with the police department. He's turning his life around. He's about to solve a murder. Everything's going great. But Christie, he just couldn't keep it in his pants. I mean, that's what it comes down to, right? He soon begins an affair with a woman working at the police station, a coworker, which, it's not great to have an affair with a coworker, particularly when her husband is away at war. So she's cheating on her husband who's off. This is, the 40s, fighting the Nazis. He's off fighting the Nazis. His wife's back home having an affair with another married man. And this relationship will actually last until 1943 when husband comes home. Hey, honey, I'm back from the front. It's so good to see you. He walks in, and what does he find? He finds Christie and his wife in bed together, and he reacts how you might expect. He beats crap out of him. And this is actually his first government job. He resigned from the police department. He's going to get another government job later that he's going to lose after he testifies. But he does resign from the police department after the fallout from this affair.
Okay, I don't know if this ride is still the same today, but back in the day, so come back with me a couple decades, the Tower of Terror.
Oh, yeah.
Where if you've never gone on it, I hated it. It was like one of the most famous rides. Is it? This is bad. Disney?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's at Disney World. I don't know if it's still there or not because I am an old
Studios,
person.
I think.
MG, okay.
They still have that.
I'm old, but this is 20 years ago. And if you don't know what this ride is, it's basically a Tower of Terror. You go up a tower, and ultimately the fear factor is that they open up and you look out and you see everyone below you. You're like in an elevator shaft, or you're in an elevator, and then all of a sudden you drop all of the floors, and it's terrifying. So it's one of those rides. But before you do the drop, there's actually this whole story, right? It's like a haunted house, and you ride along on your little elevator shaft, and it's like a very calm ride. I mean, it jerks you around a little bit. You see a ghost here, and then, you kind of jerk a little. Everyone laughs. You get a little bit of whiplash over here, but it's not like a roller coaster. That's kind of like Christie's story so far. We've jolted you around a little bit. Oh, you got 3 months here. Oh, hiring sex workers. Oh, my goodness. Having an affair with a married woman whose husband's off at war fighting the Nazis. The window's about to open. You're about to look out at the crowd below. And this story is about to take a whole other different turn that you may not be prepared for. Because while there's been kind of an extensive, decade-long petty crime isn't quite the right word, but we're not talking, he's not a cartel leader, right? He's not some mafia boss over here. He's kind of a low-level criminal. He's stealing here and there, stealing from priests, stealing from people who are using the mail, hitting women, people who are weaker than himself. And he's just not a good dude, but not the worst. Then it's August 1943. So John Reginald Christie kills his first victim. Yes, you heard me right. There we are. We're about to start dropping down the Tower of Terror. So John met a 21-year-old Austrian woman named Ruth First in a bar one evening. Ruth worked at a nearby munitions factory and lived close to John's Rillington Place apartment. She and John began a sexual relationship, and she would often visit him at his apartment when Ethel, his wife, was away. Now, she's clearly, more than 15 years younger than him. So one day, while Christie and Ruth are in bed together, a telegram arrives to announce that Ethel was on her way home. And she wasn't alone. Her brother was also with her. So according to Christie, Ruth had simply just taken off all her clothes, as I guess women are wont to do, and asked him to have relations with her. Again, none of his fault. This woman just walked into my apartment, threw off all her clothes and said, "Take me." So that's the story that Christie says. Take it for what you will, you decide credibility over there. But that's not all she wanted. In addition to saying, "Do with me what you will, sir," Ruth also said, "Run off with me. Come away with me. Ethel's coming back. Let's run away together." But Christie, being the family man that he said, he refused. Instead of running away with this naked 21-year-old girl in his apartment, he actually strangled her to death right there on the bed while they were having sex. And after he killed her, he wrapped her in her leopard coat and put her under the floorboards in the front room of his apartment with the rest of her clothes. When Ethel and her brother arrived, everything seemed normal because everything that would raise alarm was now under the floorboards. Now, the brother stayed for the day, they had a nice visit, and the brother left the next day, and Ethel went to her part-time job. Once Christie was alone in the apartment, he buried Ruth's body in his garden, and months later, he actually accidentally unearthed her skull, so he burned it along with his trash. Now, Christie used one of Ruth's leg bones to prop up a garden fence because that was cheaper than buying some wood to do the same.
And, the leg bone thing is crazy because you may recall the police searched. They're looking for Beryl and Geraldine. They searched the garden and the shed and everything else. They never noticed the leg bone. So there's literally just this leg bone propping up the fence, and nobody notices it for years. I mean,
has the bottom dropped out yet? No, we're not. We haven't reached the bottom of this ride, y'all.
Yeah, it gets worse. So that's August 1943. And remember, before it was, he would commit a crime. He might go to prison for a few months, and then years would pass, and he wouldn't commit another crime. And it had been a long time since he'd been arrested for anything. But you see, this escalation began. So that's August 1943. October 1944, Christie murdered his second victim, a 32-year-old woman named Muriel Eddy, whom he worked with at Ultra Radio Works. Now, he had struck up a friendship with Muriel and even invited her over for tea with his wife several times. But in October of 1944, when Ethel was traveling, Christie devised a plan to murder Eddy. So she had suffered with catarrh, which never heard of that before, but it's an excessive discharge or buildup of mucus in the nose or throat associated with inflammation of the mucous membrane. And Christie, remember, he had this extensive first aid background, and he said, "Hey, I can help you out." And if you want to read more about Christie, I'm going to go ahead and recommend a couple resources. One of them, Crime Library, is great. Like, you can find all sorts of cool stuff in Crime Library about this case and many others. But there's an awesome book called Death in the Air, the true story of a serial killer, the great London smog, and the strangling of a city. And it tells the story not only of Christie, but it tells it in parallel with the great smog, I believe it's 1950, that killed thousands of people in London. So they had this choking fog that was so bad that if you had any kind of respiratory problems at all, it would kill you. And thousands of people died, led to a lot of changes in the way London does a lot of things. But really interesting historical story. And then when told in combination with this, it's also interesting as well. And London had had a number of these smogs. They'd have one every few years. The 1950 one was one of the worst. But this in particular, this lady would suffer from these. When a smog would come, it would cause her to have a lot of problems and inflammation. And so he's telling her, "Hey, I can help you out. I'm a first aid guy. It's the war. I'm working for the War Department. You can trust me." Here's how this is described from Crime Library. So into a jar, he had put some inhalant disguised with the odor of Friar's balsam. He had made 2 holes in the top of the jar. This is pretty complex.
Premeditated much?
Well, yeah. One of which he used for a small hole that ran to his gas supply. So, like lots of people, he had natural gas that he used for various things. And so he had basically tapped into that with this one hose. So that tube ran into the liquid, and another tube came out of the other hole and did not touch the liquid, but was meant to keep the stuff from smelling like gas. So he's got essentially gas is coming in, but he's using the other hose with this Friar's balsam to cover it up. According to his own account, after giving her a cup of tea, he had Muriel sit on a kitchen chair with a scarf over her head and inhale this concoction. And essentially what he's doing is he's turning on the gas valve while she's doing that. And so what she's inhaling unknowingly is carbon monoxide, right? So she's breathing in this carbon monoxide, and it took less than a minute for her. Essentially, she passed out without ever really knowing that this was happening to her, right? Very effective way. And also this speaks to Christie, the coward Christie, right? And most serial killers are cowards, but he's even more one. I mean, he doesn't even
attack her.
Yeah, he doesn't even attack her.
He doesn't give her a chance.
Exactly. He doesn't give her a chance. So he knocks her out, and then once she's passed out, he strangles her with a stocking. Now, while he's strangling her, and this goes to his MO, he's having sex with her. So much like he did with the first lady that he killed, he's strangling her, he's having sex with her, he's murdering her. And he does murder her. And then he buries her in the back garden next to where he buried Ruth. So now there are two women buried in the back garden.
By the way, this is like not just his own backyard either. This is clearly a shared building, which is crazy.
Yes. So he continues, he's at Ultra Radio Works. He leaves it. He goes to the post office saving bank where he works for a while. This is where he is when the Evans trial happens, and he ends up getting fired. And getting fired from this, he becomes very depressed, and he loses nearly 30 pounds. Now recall, just to remind you of the timeline here. So in 43, he kills his first victim, right? In 44, he kills his second victim. So that's in 44. Then nothing happens for a while until 1949. And 1949 is when the Evans incident happens. It's when Beryl and Geraldine are murdered. It's when the police show up. It's when Timothy is arrested. It's when the trial happens. So despite killing two people in very quick succession, he hasn't done anything for a few years, and then all of a sudden this other murder occurs.
So when you say that at trial his criminal offenses come to light, which particular criminal offenses? Because he has
not
petty theft, and then he has some violent stuff.
So basically, all those prior arrests for the stealing, for the whacking the woman with the bat, for the stealing from the post office, all of that stuff is used on cross-examination to attack his credibility. So that's when all of that becomes public, and his employer, who's a government employer, who once again, he keeps getting these jobs, and nobody ever, including government jobs, including jobs of pretty high trust, right? He's working at a savings bank. Despite that, and despite his violent criminal history, I mean, he's literally, they don't know about the murders, but he's literally struck somebody with a bat. I can't emphasize that enough, how awful that is, and how troubling that should be to anyone who's thinking about hiring him. He gets hired anyway. What all comes out, this story is huge. The Evans trial is a massive media event in Britain. Everybody's paying attention to it. Christie becomes relatively famous. His prior crimes become famous, and he loses his job. And after he loses his job, he falls into this deep depression. He loses a whole bunch of weight, and we move into the next part of this story.
So apparently, the 1940s, 50s in the UK was a great place to work, because despite all this, Christie actually finds another job in August of 1950. He starts working in a clerical position at the British Road Transport Services. Also, pretty good job there. And then December 6th, 1952, Christie suddenly resigns from his job with the transport services with no notice. He tells his boss that he found a job in Sheffield where his wife had relocated earlier that year, and all of a sudden he's gone. Later that month, December 11th, 1952, Ethel went to her friend Rosie's house to watch TV. The next day, Ethel went to Maxwell Laundries to do her laundry, and she was seen by several witnesses who recalled her appearing, quote, well and cheerful. She did not mention an upcoming trip or anything kind of going wrong in her life. Then on December 15th, John Christie sends a letter that Ethel had previously written to her sister in Sheffield. It was originally dated the 10th, but John changed the date to the 15th. At the same time, Christie began telling his neighbors that Ethel had moved to Sheffield and he would be joining her shortly. Now, this seems strange to these friends because they thought it was unlike Ethel to leave so abruptly without even saying goodbye to them. Now, Christie also began spreading a strong disinfectant around his house and garden around this time.
And he's spraying this disinfectant everywhere. This is, if you read the book that I was talking about, Death in the Air, he has these neighbors who've moved in, and I forget where they're from. I think they're from the West Indies. They're from the West Indies, and Christie's always like dropping these racial slurs about them. But he's always talking about how they cook this food, and the aroma is just terrible, and it's so pungent, and he hates it. And he basically says he's using all this disinfectant because they're so dirty and everything they do is so disgusting that he has to clean. And that's why he's having to use all this. And everybody's like, okay. And he also explains like why it kind of stinks around the house. Well, that's those folks from the West Indies. He doesn't call them folks. Yeah, they're cooking. It's all that food they cook. It stinks. That's what he says. This episode is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Do you ever find yourself playing the budgeting game? Shifting a little money here, a little there, and hoping it all works out? Well, with the Name Your Price tool from Progressive, you can be a better budgeter and potentially lower your insurance bill too.
You tell Progressive what you want to pay for car insurance, and they'll help find you options within your budget. Try it today at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Not available in all states.
Guys, if you're like me, and I'm not saying you are, you probably could do to lose a little weight. I know I could. I am carrying some weight that I've been trying to get rid of, and it is so hard. And you feel like you do the dieting, you do the exercising, and it just doesn't work. But we also have all heard about GLP-1 and what it can do for your weight loss journey. And that's why we want to talk about Ro today. Ro offers the first FDA-approved GLP-1 pill, not a shot, a pill for weight loss at the lowest cost around. The new GLP-1 pill has the same weight loss ingredient as the shot and packs comparable results to the shot. It can help patients lose 14% of their body weight in a year on average. That's one daily pill for fewer cravings and feeling fuller with an innovative new formula clinically proven to maximize weight loss. The new FDA-approved GLP-1 pill is available at $149 for the first dose, in addition to your Ro membership fee, and $299 a month for the higher doses.
So the Ro Body membership includes access to FDA-approved GLP-1s, unlimited provider messaging, side effect management, and more, all for just $45 for your first month and $145 a month after. The Ro membership fee excludes the cost of GLP-1 medication. Go to ro.co/prosecutors to see if you're eligible for the new GLP-1 pill on Ro. That's ro.co/prosecutors to get started on Ro. Go to ro.co/safety, ro.co/safety for boxed warning and full safety information about GLP-1 medications. Based on study in non-diabetics with obesity or overweight plus a weight-related condition with diet and exercise. Here's something that keeps me up at night as a parent. And you guys know I have 4 kids. Our kids are the first generation growing up on ultra-processed foods, and the long-term effects, honestly, we're only beginning to understand them. And that's exactly why Hiya exists, to give parents a real solution in a market flooded with kids' vitamins that prioritize candy-like appeal over actual nutrition. Did you know that some children's vitamins on the market today contain up to 7 grams of sugar per serving, and they're stuffed with artificial additives and petroleum-based dyes? Hiya took the opposite approach. 0 sugar, 0 gummy additives, just clean nutrition. Here's the crazy thing. Kids actually love them. My kids love the taste, the experience, all of it. Hiya sends you these beautiful glass bottles to hold your vitamins. My kids were able to decorate with the stickers they came with so that they each have their own bottle of vitamins. And honestly, they're the ones who remind me every day, don't forget, Mom, we have to have our Hiya vitamins, and I don't have to force them to eat it. They love it.
Seriously, Hiya Vitams are a super power. They are packed with 12 organic fruits and vegetables, plus 15 essential vitamins and minerals in every dose. We're talking vitamin D, B12, C, zinc, folate. They got it all. And here's something every parent needs to hear. If getting your kids to eat vegetables feels like an impossible daily battle, Hiya's Kids Daily Greens plus Superfoods is a total game changer. It's basically chocolate milk stuffed with veggies. It's a greens powder that's packed with 55 plus whole food sourced ingredients. Just mix 1 scoop with milk or milk alternatives and watch them actually enjoy something that's secretly fueling their growing bodies. We've worked out a special deal with Hiya for their best-selling children's vitamin. Receive 50% off your first order. To claim this deal, you must go to hiyahealth.com/prosecute. This deal is not available on their regular website. Go to hiyahealth.com. That's hiyahealth.com/prosecute and get your kids the full body nourishment they need to grow into healthy adults. So January 8th, 1953, Christie suddenly sells all of his furniture. And he also sells Ethel's wedding band, which is a very strange thing to do, since usually your wife would be wearing that. 11 days later, on January 19th, 1953, despite selling all of his furniture, he kills 25-year-old Rita Nelson. Rita was pregnant at the time of her death, and she would later be determined that she was raped and strangled. So going back to the MO that Christie has, he rapes her and strangles her to death. On February 2nd, 1953, Christie falsifies Ethel's signature and empties all the money out of her bank account. That same month, Christie murders another sex worker that he had picked up in Notting Hill, 26-year-old Kathleen Maloney. Same story. Strangled, raped. That's February 2nd. And now, like I said, talk about accelerating. January 19th, murder. February 2nd, murder. March 6th, 1953, Christie kills 26-year-old Hectorina McLennan. It was McLennan and her boyfriend were looking to sublet Christie's apartment from him. So he had put out an advertisement to sublet his apartment. Remember, he sold all the furniture. He's emptied out his wife's bank account. Basically, this lady and her boyfriend, they want to sublet. She comes by to see the apartment without her boyfriend. Christie takes advantage of that opportunity, rapes her, and murders her.
What are we up to, like 5, 6 at this point in a very compressed time period? This is a frenzy, but it's not over. So now, March 20th, 1953, Christie's still looking to rent his apartment, remember? So he agrees to rent his apartment to a woman named Mrs. Riley and her husband. They actually pay him 3 months' rent in advance and lend him a suitcase. Christie moves out of that apartment on March 20th, and the next day, the landlord informs the Rileys that Christie does not own the apartment and he actually has no right to lease it to them. So they had paid him 3 months worth of rent, and the landlord's like, wait a second, I own this apartment, not him. So they don't have actually a right to live in that apartment. So even though the Rileys thought they were supposed to move in, the landlord asks them to leave, which actually they're happy to do, because the second they got in, they noticed a really foul odor throughout the entire apartment. So when the landlord was like, look, you got duped, I own this place, you can't belong here, you gotta leave, they're like, you know what, fine, good riddance, because it smells disgusting in here. Now, around March 25th, 1953, considering Christie's apartment was now vacant, because remember, the Rileys lent him a suitcase, he got out of Dodge, he's now sold his furniture, emptied Ethel's account, and also has 3 months worth of rent for an apartment that he doesn't own. The landlord lets the upstairs tenant, Beresford Brown, use the kitchen in Christie's unit. Now, as soon as Brown came down to the apartment, he was immediately struck by a horrific smell, and so he begins to attempt to clean up whatever that smell is. He decided to put up a shelf on the wall for his radio, but he knocked on the wall until he found an area that sounded hollow. After removing some wallpaper, he noticed a door behind it. He couldn't get the door to open, but he shined a light in the crack where he made a gruesome discovery. It looked as if the body of a naked woman was inside of the wall.
Yeah. Ooh. So, obviously, the police are called, and the officers, the coroner, they all show up at 10 Rillington Place. They are able to open that door, and they are shocked at what they see. First, Beresford Brown, he was completely right. There was a naked young woman in this cupboard. She was very dead, and her back was to them, just as he had described. They remove her body from the cupboard, and when they do, they notice there's something else, very large, wrapped in a blanket. They unwrap the blanket, and inside they find another woman wearing only a garter belt and stockings. Her wrists were tied in front of her, and she had clearly been strangled with a ligature. They remove her body, and when they remove her body, they see something else. And in fact, it is another body wrapped in a blanket, propped up on its head and leaning against the wall. This lady's ankles had been tied with electrical cord, and cloth was covering her head.
I'm never going to go to sleep ever again in my life. Not one, but 3 bodies.
Trust your nose.
No kidding. But also, talk about really trying to kick the can down the road. It wasn't going to smell less, no matter how much disinfectant you poured around this apartment. So even though the police removed 3 bodies from the cupboard was empty, but the horrors persisted. In the parlor, investigators noticed some loose floorboards. They pulled them up and dug through the rubble. And there they found a 4th female victim. This one much older than the other 3. It was Ethel Christie. Poor woman, man. She was separated from him for 10 years and came back only to be murdered and stuffed into the floorboards of her own home. Autopsies were performed, and the women were identified as Hectorina McLennan, Kathleen Maloney, Rita Nelson, and Ethel Christie. The investigators continued searching Christie's apartment and decided to dig up the garden. There they found the scattered skeletal remains of Ruth First and Muriel Eddy. Now investigators just had to find the man himself, Christie. So a citywide manhunt ensued because what they just discovered was one of the most horrific serial killer scenes you can imagine. They didn't have to look far. How did he get away for so long? This must have been reeking from his apartment, but somehow he's been able to get away with a suitcase that doesn't belong to him and a bunch of money that also doesn't belong to him.
So they launched the citywide manhunt. This becomes the story in London. Everyone's looking for him. Christie is so innocuous, and he just doesn't stand out at all, that despite the fact everyone's looking for him, for 6 days, they think, man, maybe he fled to the continent. Maybe he went to America. Maybe he did this and that. He's just wandering around London. This story's all over London. His picture's all over newspapers. Nobody notices him. He just wanders around London until finally a police officer spots him near the Putney Bridge in South London. He takes him into custody. At the time of his arrest, he was carrying an identity card, a ration book, his union card, an ambulance badge, and oddly, an old newspaper clipping about the remand of Timothy Evans, his old neighbor. He was brought down to the Putney police station and interrogated, and he quickly admitted to the murders of the 4 women found inside his home. At this time, he was not aware that the police had dug up the garden, and in fact, there were 6 women who were found there. But according to him, none of the deaths were his fault. A lot of accidental deaths.
Because I was going to say, just like Ruth, she came in, demanded sex from him, stripped down, and wanted him to run away with her. And the only answer to that was to strangle her while having relations with her and then throwing her into the walls or into the backyard. So this seems all like a likely story. So he starts explaining about his wife, Ethel. He said that she was in their bed and, gosh darn it, she was keeping him up because she kept moving around. She couldn't get comfortable, was moving around, and awoke him. And at that time, her face was blue and she was choking. So that's why she was moving. And it seemed to Christie that it was too late. She was about to be gone. He couldn't call for help. He tried so hard to help her breathe, to save her life, but he just couldn't And it was so clear she was just at death's door, and rather than watch her suffer, like a lame horse, he decided to end her suffering. He got a stocking because there was no other option at this point, and out of pure humanity, he strangled her. So after he did this for her own good, he found a bottle that had some phenobarbital tablets. Now, it was nearly empty, but it did have some pills in it still, and they were for his insomnia. And he realized, oh my gosh, Ethel, stupid Ethel, she had taken these pills to kill herself. She wasn't choking. She took the phenobarbital tablets on purpose to commit suicide. She was depressed. She'd been depressed for so long. She'd been depressed over these new tenants whom she viewed as persecuting her.
It's amazing how he keeps coming back to the tenants. Yeah,
those darn tenants. And by the way, none of this comes from Ethel. This all comes from Christie, because you know what? Ethel's dead. And she never complained about these persecuting, smelly, stinky tenants before. But he realized what she'd done. Ethel, why did you have to do this? So he left her there in the bed for 2 or 3 days because he was, I guess, too sad that she was dead.
I guess that's
whatever
what
it was.
For.
But he was walking around with her dead body in their bed, and one day when he walked by, squeak! He realized, wait, I have some loose boards in the front room. It kind of dips down a little bit, so that's where she should lay. So he wrapped her lovingly in a blanket, and he laid her to rest in that little depression in the ground under the floorboards of the front room so that she could be near him forever. And he said, quote, I thought that was the best way to lay her to rest. How could you blame him?
Yeah. And if that were the only death, I mean, who knows, He's just a heartbroken man who lost his wife. Alice, you're judging this man who lost his wife. God, can't believe you. The unfortunate thing for Christie, number one, no one believed that story, but he has more dead bodies to account for. So he has to come up with more stories.
Quite literally.
Yeah. So this was a mercy killing. I mean, honestly, she really killed herself. He just
Can we talk about victim blaming over here?
Yeah. I mean, seriously, right? This guy's a real piece of work. So that's Ethel. So regarding Rita Wilson, he claimed that she had demanded 30 shillings from him in the street and said if he refused, she would scream and accuse him of assaulting her. Now, he tried to do the right thing. He tried to walk away, but darn it, she wouldn't let him go, and she followed him into his home. She then hit him with a frying pan. And when she hit him with the frying pan, you just got to imagine how this happened, okay? So she whacks him with a frying pan. She hits him so hard, Christie falls down, knocked out. She falls backwards into a chair that just so happened to have a rope hanging from it. So he's out cold. He wakes up, and there she is in the chair, strangled. She's essentially strangled herself after hitting him with a frying pan, and boom. What's a man to do? These things happen, right?
She fell into a noose, y'all. She fell into a noose. She fell into the noose, exactly.
How
does a noose hang from a chair anyways?
Yeah, exactly. Why do you hang a noose from your chair? How do you fall into a chair and get your head in the noose, strangle yourself? How does that happen? I don't know. But, I mean, like most people who saw something so horrific, what does he do? Like a good Englishman, he makes some tea. He makes himself some tea. She's strangled to death in the chair, drinks it, goes to bed. Next day he wakes up. She's still in the chair. He's got to do something with her, right? I mean, what are you going to do, right? Who would believe this story? Like, it's not like he can go to the police and tell them this thing happened. He's got, he's had a mercy killing before. He didn't even defend himself. It's like the house rose up to defend him from this woman. So he decides, I'm going to put her in the cupboard.
Because you can't lay her with your wife.
No, that would
different places.
Yeah, that wouldn't be cool at all. Okay. But the problem is, once again, that's 2. We got 4 more to go, but 2 more that he knows they found. So then there's Kathleen Maloney, and he says, look, this is rough. This has been a rough time for him. 2 people have died in his house. So he decides, I'm going to go out to the cafe and have something to drink. And you know what? Maybe I need to get out of this apartment. This apartment is cursed. I need to get out of it. So he goes out to this cafe. He runs into this young lady who's looking for an apartment. And wouldn't you know it, he has an apartment. So maybe she should come home with him and look at the house. This one, he's probably still suffering from the blow to the head from the frying pan, because he takes her back to the apartment and then he doesn't know what happened. He has a complete memory loss. All he knows is he wakes up and there she's on the floor, unconscious, apparently dead, unclear what happened. Maybe she fell in the same chair. Nobody can say. And he's like, well, shoot, here we go. What am I going to do? I guess I'll put her in the cupboard too. So that's his first 3 deaths, of which he is completely innocent, that occur to him. Very unlucky. If you guys have ever seen Tucker and Dale versus Evil, very similar story. It's just, he's just around and all these people keep dying on him and he doesn't know what to do. So he puts them in the cupboard. And I wish I was joking, but these are the stories that he is telling the police.
He has the worst luck in the world because people just keep dropping dead around him. He doesn't even touch them or look at them. They just fall into nooses or, choke on pills that they swallow themselves. Now, when it comes to Hectorina McLennan, though, he had 2 different stories about how she died. In the first, he seemed to indicate that Hectorina and her boyfriend, they were down on their luck. They needed a place to stay, so he invited them in to share his apartment with him out of the goodness of his heart. And they stayed together in this, remember, he had sold all his furniture, right? So it's a barely furnished flat, and it's not exactly very comfortable when you don't really have chairs or furniture or beds to share with 2 other people. The 3 of them had kind of an uncomfortable stay. So in one version of the story, Christie asked Hectorina and her boyfriend to leave because this wasn't fun. And he said that the girl returned the next night to wait for her boyfriend. And Christie was like, look, lady, you got to get out. And so they struggled a bit. And some of her clothing just fell off. It got torn off. He has no idea what happened. They were talking and all of a sudden her clothes started falling off her body. And then, can you believe it? While they're struggling and talking about how she can't stay here, she just falls limp and she sinks to the floor. And Christie was like, oh no. Did some of that clothing that just fell off of you get wrapped around your neck and it just strangled you? Like right there, he's watching something crazy in front of his eyes. So he pulled her into the kitchen and he sat her on a chair. Now, she seemed to be dead at that point. So he just said, well, I don't have a place to put you, all my dead people in this house. So he put her in the cupboard as well because the clothing that just fell off happened to strangle her and he had nothing to do with it. So that story changes later because even on the spectrum of Christie's stories, this one's pretty outlandish. So in a second story that he told much later, he claimed that while Hectorina and her boyfriend were at the labor exchange, he actually showed up and invited Hectorina to come to his house that morning, but alone. He gave her a drink and he unfastened a clasp that released a gas. So she tried to leave, but he stopped her in the hallway. He said, quote, I seized hold of her by the neck and applied just sufficient pressure to make her limp. That makes it seem so calm. Just sufficient pressure for you to go limp, my dear. Then he took her back to the kitchen where he decided it was, quote, essential to use the gas again. I made love to her and then put her back on the chair. I killed her. He shoved her into the alcove in a sitting position, and he kept her upright by hooking her bra to the blanket around Maloney's legs. So this one, he does claim to have murdered her.
And he starts to come clean on a lot of these because, as you're going to see, his trial strategy is a unique one. So initially, everything's an accident. People are just falling into their clothes, getting choked, falling into ropes, killing themselves. It's just like a cavalcade of insanity all around him, of dying people, right? But eventually he starts telling these stories where he's laying out what actually happened. And this really starts when he is confronted with the evidence from the garden. Because it's one thing, and I'm saying this as if it makes sense. It's one thing to explain these 4 murders the way he has, but how are you going to explain the 2 dead ladies buried in the garden, who obviously had been there for years? At this point, he says, okay, fine, he murdered them. But now everybody's like, okay, so you killed 6 people and buried them in the garden or stuffed them in the walls of your house. What about the Evans murders? What about Beryl and Geraldine? did you murder them or did Timothy Evans murder them? And at first, now, by this point, he is admitting, I murdered those 6 people. But when they asked him about the Evans movie, he's like, no, I did not kill them. I didn't kill Beryl. I didn't kill Geraldine. But then he gets a lawyer. And so the lawyer is like, okay, so it's 1950s England. You know, we just executed one guy in a month after we convicted him of only 2 murders. You got 6. What are we going to do? It's obvious he did it. You know, there's no question. And the only thing they can figure is insanity. We need an insanity defense. And this is going to be the McNaughton rule. We've talked about the McNaughton rule many times. It comes from England, so of course that's what they're going to use, which is basically you are so out of touch with reality that you don't really know the difference between good and evil. You are delusional. It's more than the the colloquial use of the word crazy. And we call people crazy all the time. I mean, you know, you see Koberger and you say, man, that is a madman, right? He's crazy. He's a crazed killer, right? Well, that isn't crazy in the legal sense. In the legal sense, you know, I thought I was fighting aliens or demons and it turned out they were people, right? That kind of thing is what you really need for this insanity defense. So his lawyers are trying to figure out how are we going to do this? And they decide, and this is questionable strategy, but they decide the only way we're going to convince a jury this guy's crazy is he needs to have killed as many people as possible. We need to get this murder count really high to such an extent that no sane person would do this, so therefore he must be crazy. So his own lawyers, start putting a lot of pressure on him to say that he killed Beryl and Geraldine. And their whole theory is, look, the more people you killed, the more likely you are to be crazy. So that's what they tell him. Well,
not a great trial strategy, y'all.
Not a great strategy. But eventually he's like, okay, fine. I killed Beryl. So he says he killed her, but he also says it was a mercy killing. This is kind of along the lines of his wife. He says that essentially she was so distraught about her life and so distraught about the pregnancy and so distraught about being married to a brute like Evans that she begged him to help her kill herself. So not to have an abortion, but to kill herself. And in fact, he found her in the midst of a suicide attempt using gas, which he was good at, but she failed. She couldn't make it work. So he agreed to kill her. He agreed to help her, and he did kill her. But despite his attorney's urgings, he would not say that he killed Geraldine. He was adamant. He didn't do that. He did not kill the baby. Like, either he did kill her, but despite the fact he's now admitted to killing 7 people, like that was just too far even for him, or he didn't do it, right? One of the two.
For what it's worth, it's not his MO.
And it's not his MO. It is a little out of normal. So, okay, so this is an interesting thing. Now we're setting this up. Well, he's now going to trial. On June 22nd, 1953, he goes to trial, and they do this in much the same way as the Evans trial. They don't charge him with all the murders. They only charge him with the murder of his wife, Ethel Christie. That's the murder they charge him with. And at the Old Bailey, same place that Evans was tried, and he pleads not guilty by reason of insanity. As I said, he's only charged with murdering his wife, but in an interesting twist, all the murders are brought in by the defense. The defense is like, no, bring in the murders. We want that 404B. Bring it in. The more murders, the better. And so they're bringing in all these murders, just piling this in. Crazy strategy, right? But that is their strategy. The trial lasts for 4 days, and it takes the jury an hour and 20 minutes to announce the verdict. Christie was guilty, and he would be sentenced to death.
And the UK does it quick, because July 15th, 1953, like a couple weeks later, not even a full month later, Christie is hanged at Pentonville Prison. That same day, after an inquiry and 2 parliamentary debates regarding whether Timothy Evans did in fact kill his wife and daughter, the findings were released. The investigation found that it was Evans who had been the killer. But despite this finding, the public remained unconvinced that 2 murderers lived in the same house and called for another inquiry, which was initially denied. Fast forward to 1961. So Christie had been hanged 8 years earlier. After Ludovic Kennedy's book 10 Rillington Place came out, which criticized the investigation into Beryl and Geraldine's death, another parliamentary debate was held. But still a second inquiry was denied.
So by the way, Christie was hanged by the same hangman who hanged Timothy Evans. So, a little bit of continuity there. So we're having all these debates in England, and all of this is happening, by the way, and this is important, against the backdrop of England's debate over the death penalty. So in the 50s, there had been a death penalty abolishment movement. Now you have this sort of very strange situation where people think maybe we executed a guy who was innocent. And so this is something that hangs around in the public's mind and becomes used more and more by politicians. In 1965, politician Herbert Wolfe and editor of the Northern Echo, Harold Evans, formed the Timothy Evans Committee, calling for another inquiry into the matter. Their efforts worked, and in 1965, Home Secretary Sir Frank Soskis ordered a new inquiry, which was to be led by High Court Judge Sir Daniel Braben. The inquiry went on from 1965 to 1966, with Braben ultimately concluding something that doesn't make any sense. Ultimately concluding that Timothy Evans likely did murder his wife, but did not murder his daughter. And remember, he was only charged with murdering his daughter. Recall, they were afraid that, what gentleman in England would convince a man for murdering his annoying wife? So we're only going to charge him with murdering his daughter. And so now this inquiry has concluded, well, actually, he did murder his wife, but the one he was convicted of murdering, he did not kill.
What? We'll go into theories later, but much more likely the other way around.
Much more likely, yeah.
So in October of 1966, Timothy Evans was granted a posthumous royal pardon for the murder of his daughter. What? He had never been charged with the murder of his wife, so now he's basically exonerated. He's clean as the driven snow, I guess, and his body was exhumed from Pentonville Prison and reburied in St. Patrick's Roman Catholic Cemetery in Leytonstone, London. So he's not a murderer at all, whatever it is. He's completely, exonerated here. January 2003, now we've just jumped ahead half a century. Timothy Evans's half-sister and sister were awarded compensation for the miscarriage of justice on his behalf. So not only was he exonerated in death, moved from that prison burial ground to a Catholic cemetery, now his family members are actually given a civil settlement for the miscarriage of justice of being hanged.
Okay, so that brings us to sort of a few things we're going to talk about, some of which we've already talked about a little bit. We're going to talk about more because you have a situation where John Reginald Christie is a serial killer. There's no question about it. And he's living in this apartment with this violent couple, the Evans. And there was just this really kind of, naive, bizarre belief by the British public that it's just, what are the chances that two murderers could be living in the same apartment? And they just couldn't believe it. It's just not possible that you could have one sort of innocuous murderer living in the same place as a serial killer. And so you have this in this froth of political intrigue about what's going to have death penalty. And what you always see with death penalty debates is people are always looking for the innocent person who was executed, because it's much easier to argue for abolishing the death penalty based on the fact that an innocent person might have been executed than it is on the basis that someone who did something really horrible. Nobody was going to say, man, some of y'all would because you're very principled and that's great. But very few people are going to say that John Reginald Christie, what a tragedy that he was executed. He murdered those 6 women in really horrible ways. But wow, what an injustice. We need to get rid of the death penalty. But if you have somebody who was innocent, he was executed, then you're like, okay, this is something people can get behind. So you have this happen. I think it's interesting that it took, in 1966, he's exonerated. There's no compensation or anything paid for another, 37 years? Not till 2003? Kind of makes you wonder, did they really think he didn't do it? And there's also the fact that they did think he murdered his daughter. It's just a very strange, everything that happened is weird about this, right? And as far as the legal question goes, he was convicted of murdering his daughter. And we talked about his confessions. We've talked about the 4 confessions. We briefly mentioned another one. People talk about the formal confessions that he made. They talk about how there are things about them. Number one, they're not internally consistent. They're completely all over the place. And some people say, well, he was probably beaten by the police or coerced by the police. They point to the fact that he's not the sharpest tool in the shed, right? I mean, it's unclear. It's not as if we have detailed information on his intellect like we would about a Jesse Misskelley. But most people presume that he had some sort of intellectual disability. And when people talk about these cases with people who have intellectual disabilities, advocates will treat people who have those disabilities as if they are incapable of really even functioning. And we know that's not true, but that's the way people are often described in these cases. And you got that a lot with Timothy Evans. Timothy Evans was able in life to do a whole lot of things, but nevertheless, his problems could have contributed to some sort of false confession. But there's another confession that rarely comes up. So he's been arrested. He's already confessed. He's like in a holding cell. And one of the officers who actually would later arrest Christie was standing watch outside of his cell because there was this fear that he might try and take his own life. It's just like we often have now. We have these suicide watches. And Evans began to confide in him while this is happening. And he tells this officer that after Beryl's death, Geraldine just wouldn't stop crying, and he couldn't figure out how to make her happy. Like, he tried to feed her, he tried to rock her, but she just wouldn't stop crying. And it's the middle of the night, and he can't sleep, and he's so tired, and he just couldn't take it anymore, and he strangles the baby. He murders the baby to quiet her. And the officer actually reported this conversation. He immediately goes to his superiors. He reports the conversation. But the position of everybody's like, well, that's interesting, but he's already confessed. We got all the evidence, so great. They don't document it. It's never testified to in trial, but it is something that this person reported. So this is a really interesting confession because it happens outside of the interrogation setting. And it seems to confirm that Evans killed his daughter. And what's interesting about it is when he tells this story, he doesn't actually confess to killing Beryl. He only confesses to this officer in the story to killing Geraldine. I think that's pretty interesting because it may point to a possibility here where both men are actually guilty of something. Guys, it's hard to believe. Summer is almost upon us. It's going to be spring before you know it, and that means it's going to be heating up, and you're going to want to be out at the pool. And let me tell you, my kids love the pool. And what they also love is dressing up in coordinated swimsuits. And that's one reason I love Minnow. Minnow is a family lifestyle brand that embraces clean lines, simple details, and crisp seaside breezes. I'm finding something for my 6-year-old daughter, my 4-year-old son, and my nearly 1-year-old that all match, that they'll all love, and that they can wear out to the pool. Every suit is thoughtfully designed with comfort, performance, and protection in mind. All suits have UPF 50 plus protection, blocking 98% of UVA and UVB rays.
It is not an understatement when I say Minnow is my favorite swimsuit for all 4 of my kids. They range from baby all the way to my big boys. I have their best-selling products like their girls' rash guard one piece. Absolutely love it for my girl. And the boys' boardies are their favorite swimsuit every time we go to the pool. And I love that all of them can have rash guard shirts because of that UPF protection. The swimwear fabric is buttery smooth hand feel, and you can wash it over and over, but they hold up their absolute amazing structure. Their thoughtful collections allow the whole family to coordinate. You know I love that. Inspired by the French Caribbean, Minnow presents its spring collection, a complete family vacation wardrobe designed to be worn on island from arrival to departure. Anchored by their largest women's assortment yet and refined styles for kids, the collection is captured in St. Barth's and designed to be worn all day, every day. Shop Minnow's Spring 2026 collection at shopminnow.com and enter code MEETMinnow15 at checkout to receive 15% off your first order. That's shopminnow.com, code MEETMinnow15 for 15% off. These days, I'm all about quality over quantity, especially in my closet. If it's not well made and versatile, it's just not worth it to me. That's honestly why I love Quince. The fabrics feel elevated, the cuts are thoughtful, and the pricing actually makes sense. Quince makes high-quality wardrobe staples using premium fabrics like 100% European linen, 100% silk, and organic cotton poplin. Lightweight cotton cashmere sweaters are perfect for these changing seasons. And I really mean this when I say I wear Quince all the time, everywhere. I wear it on flights because it washes well, doesn't wrinkle, and I can throw it in the washing machine knowing it'll hold up. I can wear it to court and then dress it down to be able to go to my kids' soccer games. Their timeless pieces are going to become a staple of my entire closet.
Guys, I've talked about Quince and how much I love it and all the different Quince outfits I have, but I have a new one. I gotta tell you, this one touched something deep inside because one of my favorite shows growing up was Seinfeld. And one of the episodes that always stood out to me was the one about cashmere and cashmere sweaters and how luxurious cashmere could be. But I'd never had cashmere. I thought I couldn't afford cashmere. Cashmere is for, luxury people. And then I found Quince and I found myself a cashmere sweater. And finally, I own a cashmere sweater, and it is exactly as luxurious as Seinfeld made it out to be. I love wearing it. It's beautiful. It's comfortable. It is one of my favorite pieces of clothing, and I have Quince to thank for it, and you need to get involved with Quince too. Right now, go to quince.com/prosecutors for free shipping and 365-day returns. That's a full year to wear it and love it, and you will. Now available in Canada too. Don't keep settling for clothes that don't last. Go to quince.com, quince.com/prosecutors for free shipping and 365-day returns. Quince.com/prosecutors.
And if you remember, when they looked at the autopsy for Geraldine, she did have bruising on her face, which would be consistent with strangling, smothering her here. And I think we never talk about our theories before we do this, but I think it's very interesting that from the very beginning, really, Evans's confessions have included Christie. Now, let's talk about Christie's trial strategy. So Christie, as we said, had many stories about all these women he murdered, right? But he never denied killing them. So Beryl and Geraldine were different, though. Christie was adamant he did not kill either the mother or the daughter. However, Christie's lawyers were the one who adopted this very unusual trial strategy. Remember where they said, in order to save Christie's life, they have to prove that he was insane. He was mad. And the only way they could do that is that the more people Christie killed, the more likely the jury would buy this defense that he was insane, didn't know what he was doing. And so Christie was encouraged by these attorneys strenuously to admit to killing Beryl. Only at that point did Christie agree to confess to her murder. But of course, we now know, despite the efforts of his attorneys, this strategy didn't work. Christie, wasn't actually found to be insane at all. But even in this world of saying, look, we got to get the body count high. The higher it is, the more likely you're going to be found insane. He actually never admits to killing Geraldine. He's adamant he had nothing to do with killing Geraldine. And again, look, he eventually comes around, even with all these women whose clothes just fall off of them, and he still plays a part in it. And ultimately, he comes around saying, yeah, I killed him. But
he
not
eventually
Geraldine.
Admits. That's how we know how all of them died. Because he tells a crazy story at first, but then when this strategy happens, that's when he talks about the gas and the tubes and all that stuff. Like, he tells that whole story, right? And some people don't even believe that. They think he was lying about that. Now, he did murder him, but maybe the gas stuff was made up. I don't know. The gas seems pretty effective to me. Geraldine's interesting, too, because if you're the lawyers and you truly believe your only hope is to really show this guy was totally crazy, I would think Geraldine would be very helpful because it's such a different kind of
sexually
murder.
motivated, right? Like it's just an innocent little baby.
It's like he can't even
clearly is
control
mad.
himself, right? Yeah. He's so mad. He just kills. He can't help it. Which, once again, not the best strategy.
Not a good strategy. I don't buy it.
But I guess if that's all you had, I mean, I don't know. Okay. So let's talk about the anomalies about this. So did he do this? So there are a number of anomalies with the murders of Beryl and Geraldine that don't fit Christie's MO. First, there's no evidence that Christie ever murdered a child. So this would automatically be unusual for him to murder Geraldine. But second, Beryl shows no signs of sexual assault. This is unusual for Christie. Everyone he murdered, he raped. His wife, it's a little unclear, but he also was married to her, so I don't know how much we can say of that. But certainly the other women, he murdered them, raped them while he was murdering them. There's no evidence of sexual assault for Beryl, and this was something they did check. They didn't do as good a job as they could have, but it is something they checked. Third, Christie always concealed his victims. You know, he buries them under the floorboards. He put those 3 women in the cupboard, but remember, he sealed the door and covered it up, right? I mean, yes, there's the smell, but he's trying to cover that up with the various disinfectants and everything else. But Beryl and Geraldine are just left sitting in the shed for quite a long time for anyone to find. Even if he might do that temporarily before he moved them somewhere else, he never moves them. He just leaves them there. And eventually they are found. And in fact, the police had come to 10 Rillington Place about these murders, didn't find them, and leave. He doesn't say, man, I need to hide those bodies in case they come back. He does nothing with them. So that's a little unusual. Also, Beryl had injuries to her face. She had a swollen right eye and a bloody lip, which were more consistent with a violent murder than Christie's MO of subduing his victims with gas before killing them, and are also consistent with the story that Timothy Evans, in his third confession, told, and consistent with what both Christie and his wife, and this is important, his wife also testified at trial about hearing what happened upstairs. And there's really no indication that if his wife thought that Christie had murdered these 2 people, that she would lie to get Timothy Evans executed. So that is a big hole in the story, that she's telling the story of hearing this fight, hearing the silence, and then not seeing Beryl anymore, right? And then you see on Beryl this evidence of being struck. Now look, Christie had been violent before. He struck the lady with the bat. That happened. But in his murders, he did not tend to be violent. He tended to subdue them. And frankly, it seems like Christie had this bizarre for any normal person, but maybe fairly typical psychosexual thing going on. How does he describe what he did to one lady? That he made love to her. Like he's literally strangling her to death after incapacitating her with gas. He calls it making love to her. And I think in his mind, this is some bizarre, consensual is a strong word, but interaction. And so the beating seems not that consistent with that. And if you haven't been disturbed enough by this story, let's just go the final step. There's the hair. So Christie kept trophies of his victims. And in his case, the trophy that he preferred to keep was hair, in particular, pubic hair. So Christie's victims, the ones that we had more than skeletons of, were all missing pubic hair. The police were only able to find 110 with 4 distinct cuttings, one of which they were able to match to his own wife. So he had taken cuttings of her hair as well after he killed her, as well as the 3 women who were in the cupboard. But Beryl showed no evidence that pubic hair had been removed from her body, and no hair matching her body was found in his possession. So if Christie did kill her, it was a very different kind of murder than the ones he had committed before.
And just by the way, his trophy itself makes Geraldine's murder seem so much more unlikely, because it seems very sexually motivated and mature sex, not pedophilia, right? And well, boy, was that a Tower of Terror crash.
Yeah, I mean, seriously, right?
I mean, literally, the more, how does anyone turn out like that?
Yeah. And, we talked about his background. I mean, there's no real indication.
Regular, normal background. He's the youngest. What? The only thing was he's the baby of the family. I guess don't spoil the baby of the family, guys.
Yeah. He was a Boy Scout. He was a war hero. I mean, he had a lot going for him. He was a police officer. But he had this in him where he turned really violent. Okay, Alice. So I think that brings us to the ultimate question. I will say this. In England, it is widely accepted that it's now accepted that he killed both of them. That is just Timothy Evans was completely innocent. It was a miscarriage of justice. He was an innocent man who was executed. John Reginald Christie killed both Beryl and Geraldine. That's the widely held view. One group of people who does not believe that are actually Beryl and Geraldine's family. So her brother, a few years ago, actually wrote a book about this, saying that this was a complete miscarriage of justice, that Timothy Evans was a horrific, violent brute of a man who terrorized his sister, and he was the one who killed her, and that this was a very bizarre thing that happened with Christie, but that it was Timothy Evans who did it. He obviously had a lot of personal interactions with Evans, and just because Evans was a violent brute of a man doesn't mean he did it.
We have a literal serial killer living below. We have a literal
serial killer there.
A literal serial killer, proven serial killer living below. So I think both men are involved. I think that they got to talking and Christie taught Evans how to get rid of his wife, which is why there are markings of the same type of murder. She was strangled to death, and so was Geraldine. I think that for sure, 100%, there was a miscarriage of justice because I think Evans was rightfully convicted for murdering Geraldine. I also think it's highly likely that it was by the hands of Timothy Evans who killed Beryl. It's possible Christie was there coaching him through this. Probably not because of what Ethel heard, but I think that the men had probably talked, and whatever it was, maybe, I don't know, you see killers in each other's eyes and they just understood each other, but Evans hadn't killed before, and this was a way to get rid of his pesky wife. And the disposal of the body very well may have been actually Christie helping Evans as well. But here's what I think happened. This poor woman had no chance. There were absolutely two killers in that building. And I'm not exactly positive, but I think the fact that with all four confessions, why bring in Christie? It is such a bizarre thing to bring him in. There's some interwoven involvement of Evans, whether it was physically being there, I think that may not actually be the case, or he is the one who incepted this idea, taught him how to do it, and perhaps even helped him carry out the removal and hiding away of the two kids. I think there's a lot of truth in what he said, and I think his third confession, and certainly the confession to the guard that was never actually testified to, that Geraldine was not the original intent. Maybe things just got violent, out of hand. Maybe he hadn't even planned Beryl's murder, but eventually, because of his violence, it was going to get there. And he had been talking to a serial killer neighbor and knew kind of his MO and knew how to kill someone. But Geraldine, I think, was probably crying in the middle of the night, and Evans couldn't deal with it and smothered her. Maybe it wasn't premeditated. Maybe that actually could have been one of those, like, I lost my mind, I didn't know what I was doing. But I think there is no question that Evans killed his daughter and did have a hand. We'd say this all the time. Even if your hands didn't kill the person, if you were the reason they're dead because you hired someone or you put it into motion, you're still guilty of it. So I think he was rightfully convicted of Geraldine. If he were charged for his wife's murder, he should have been found guilty as well. But both of them were rightfully hanged. So there wasn't a miscarriage of justice in that sense.
Yeah, I mean, okay, first of all, I think he absolutely killed Geraldine. I just don't, it's so strange that the government, it's like they decided we want to exonerate this guy. But the only way to do that is to say he didn't kill his daughter. So we'll say he killed his wife, but not his daughter. He was convicted of his daughter. It's just it's so weird, right? Because it seems much more likely that he killed his daughter. Now, I think you're right. They have to be involved. And there's a few things here. Okay. There has to be some interaction between the two of them, because in a world where Beryl and Geraldine, without Timothy, he just goes to work one day and he comes home and his wife and daughter are missing. In a world where that happened, anyone who functions in society, and I don't care what his intellectual challenges were, would go try and find him. Like, even imagine a world in which Tim's had some bad run-ins with the police before, doesn't like the Bobbies, and he's like, I ain't going to the coppers. I'm going to go to them. He'd at least look for him. He'd be trying to find him. He'd ask her mom, like, hey, did Beryl come home? Did she bring Geraldine? We've been having issues. Something, right? You wouldn't just sell all your furniture and move back to Wales. That is such a bizarre thing to do, right? If you were just completely innocent, had nothing to do with it. But you also wouldn't just so happen to implicate your mild-mannered neighbor who turns out to be a serial killer if he didn't have something to do with it. He has to be involved somehow. And I think, and I don't think we'll ever know exactly. I mean, I feel very confident he killed Geraldine. What happened to Beryl is much harder to say. It's possible Christie killed her. It's possible it was some weird thing happened. Maybe there even was some sort of abortion type thing, and Christie just got a kick out of it. Wasn't sexual in a typical way, but it was the same sort of power dynamic, even though he didn't rape her. Just the idea of her coming to him for help and him murdering her gave him such a thrill that he did that. Right? That's a possibility. And one reason I think that they both had to be involved is because Evans, not only does he walk into a police station, remember, in a world where he had nothing to do with his daughter and wife being killed, that first confession, he's not being tortured. He's not being coerced. He's not even on the radar. 24 hours. Not on the radar. He literally walks into the police station and says, I murdered my wife and put her down the drain. That's literally what he says. He's got some involvement.
And by the way, I think with that, I think this is why I think at the very least, Christie helped dispose of the body, because remember, Evans already got out of Dodge. So there really was that drain in front. And I think that was the plan. But Christie couldn't lift the manhole by himself. And so actually in that first confession, Evans was saying what he actually thought, that his wife was down the drain. But in fact, Christie couldn't do it. So he threw her in the shed, which is why when Ethel went back there previously, she hadn't seen anything, because maybe she was under the floorboards. And then the drain didn't open. So now she's in the shed.
I have a theory about this. I'm not sure who killed Beryl. It could have been Christie. It could have been Timothy. Maybe that fight did end with a big thump and he hit her and she fell and hit her head and knocked her out. And that's why it ended. And then the next morning, she's like threatening to go to the police. Imagine a world in which she's threatening to go to the police. Christie hears that. I'll give you my theory, but this is an alternative theory. He hears that and he thinks, I can't have the police here. I can't have the police messing around in this apartment because I got 2 bodies buried in the backyard. The last thing I want's the police here. I got to shut that woman up. And he does murder her. He kills her. He gives Tim some cockamamie story about an abortion gone wrong. But then Tim's the one who ends up killing Geraldine, exactly like he told the officers. Because Tim is a violent man, and he absolutely could do that, particularly if he's sort of broken up. Maybe Christie even tells him that she died as a result of that fight. And there's all sorts of ways it could have gone, right? So that's one possibility.
Or he could have just said, I killed her for you so that you wouldn't get in trouble, right? That's maybe why there's this weird,
because the first story, he's protecting Christie. When he tells that story about there's a mystery man, why is he protecting Christie? Why is he admitting to the murder and protecting Christie? It doesn't make any sense unless there is something like that. I think, so whoever killed him, one other possibility, and I actually kind of lean towards this, is that Christie actually wanted the police to find Beryl and Geraldine. Because I kind of wonder, so he had them buried in the garden. Remember, he finds the skull, he burns it. He leaves the leg. Well, I think this actually fits in what I'm trying to say. So I think he was really worried about those 2 bodies buried in the backyard. I think for a long time it bothered him, and he wondered, is one day are they going to be found? Are they going to realize I did this, right? Remember, he kills these 2 people, and then there are no murders for years, right? I kind of wonder if these 2 murders fell into his lap, And he told Tim, I'll take care of it. Like you said, I'll dump him in the grate or whatever. He couldn't lift it. I kind of wonder if he wanted him to be found, and that's why he didn't hide him that well, thinking the police will search, they'll find those bodies, and I can push that off on Tim too. And I can explain that away, and then I'm free and clear. I don't have to worry about those murders anymore. Like, the police will surely notice the bone propping up the fence, and then I'll say, yeah, that crazy Tim who killed his wife and daughter, he must have killed them too, and he gets away with it, right? I just wonder if there was something like that going on. And then it didn't happen that way. They never found the bodies.
And I think he starts getting really stressed, which is why he starts killing like crazy.
Right. He goes into frenzy.
Because I think Ethel caught on too. Ethel knew something, which is why she probably went, because she lived with him and his violent self for a very long time without getting murdered. But then all of a sudden, she gets killed, and everyone else, you're right about this, everyone else that gets killed afterwards is hidden in the home. And he's getting more and more desperate with the spraying of the disinfectant. Like, if you have a dead body in your house, it's only going to smell worse over time. It's not going to smell less unless you do something like remove the body or burn it. But he can't do that because he's freaking out now because his plan didn't work, if that was indeed his plan, to be found and blame Evans.
Yeah, it's just because he's clearly snapped. I mean, there's no out here. There's no end. You know, he's sold everything he has. He's got all the money he's ever going to have. He's quit his job. He's murdered all these people. Like, it's inevitable at that point he's going to be caught. Before, he's trying to hide everything. Now it's like completely frenzied, completely, you know, I hate to say insane because that was his whole theory. But yeah, so something weird happened there. We're never going to know exactly what it was, but I agree with you. Whatever it is, I really feel like both men were culpable.
And both men were rightfully hanged.
Yeah, I mean, I have no sympathy for Timothy Evans.
I do not think there was a miscarriage of justice there.
I think Timothy Evans absolutely killed his daughter. I just don't.
100%.
It doesn't even make sense for Christie to do it. Like, it doesn't fit with anything. It doesn't cover anything up. Like, she wasn't old enough to be a witness. And also, the way his confessions work
point towards it, right? Like, the fourth one is the one that really gets me, that pointed me to his guilt of Geraldine, is if, in fact, this man just murdered your wife, you're going to give your daughter, who you never intended to kill, to the man who killed your wife, the murderer of your wife, to find a safe place for her. That makes no sense. Especially, remember, they have family. Who was the person who was like, something's wrong? It was actually his own mother, and he went to go stay with his aunt, uncle, grandparents. He had lots of family who could care for the child. So this was not a desperate situation where he was going to be the single father with no ability to care. His own mother, who wrote the letter that caused him to walk into that police station, was talking to Beryl every single day. So much so that you would think she was very involved, and she was worried about where Geraldine was, someone who could potentially take care. This happened all the time. This still happens to this day, right? When there's a single parent and maybe a grandparent steps in to try and help out, especially in like a tragic situation where, you know, a very young child loses one of their parents and it's very difficult to hold down a job and care for a young infant. So that wasn't the situation. When he said that he handed her over for safekeeping to the murderer of his wife, that immediately, red bells went off in my mind that he was the one who killed Geraldine. If nothing more than giving Geraldine to a murderer.
And his first story is very similar. Like, he gave them to random people, you know, like he's distancing himself so much from Geraldine. It makes it seem more like he killed her than Beryl. And honestly, it makes sense, right? Like, his descriptions of what happened to Beryl, other than the third one, are very much like, well, something else happened to her. I had to get rid of the body, and then who knows what happened to Geraldine. And it just feels like maybe Christie did kill Beryl. Evans can't come to grips with the fact he killed his daughter, and he's avoiding it.
The more we talk about this, though, because I do, all along, I've been like, how does this work? But both are culpable in some way with Beryl. I think that may be very well what you said, is that thud, he hurt her really bad, but he may have even almost killed her. Like, she may be completely unconscious and like near death. And remember, a lot of Evans's stories are these mercy killings, right? His own wife, Ethel, what was that, a mercy killing? Was he actually saying something about Beryl? That's how they rationalize it to each other, that it was a mercy killing. Maybe that thud was, in fact, he whacked her so hard across the face. We know that there was bruising, there was violence on her face, that she actually was probably near death's door. And if she were to wake up, they're both dead, right? Because he just whopped her so hard that she almost died. And then the police are going to come and find all these dead bodies in the backyard. So both Evans and Christie are like, we can't let this stand. Or that the reason no one heard from her, she didn't threaten anything that morning because she was near death, if not already dead. So they just finished her off with the both of them because maybe he ran to Christie. Evans was like, what do I do? And Christie was like, I got this. I know what to do.
And it makes sense because you have sort of her death happens. Then there's some distance with Geraldine. He trusts Christie to take care of both bodies. He flees. When he goes to the police, he only tells them he protects Christie because Christie knows the truth. So he's got to protect Christie. And he basically says, oh, it was sort of an accident that happened. It wasn't me. It was an accident that happened to Beryl and she died. And then once again, he can't even face what happened to Geraldine. So he distances himself from that with this bizarre story about giving her to some family to take care of her. I mean, that makes sense. I think that is probably as close to what happened as we'll ever know. I mean, we're never going to know, right? I mean, there's never going to be some resolution to this story because we know everything we're going to know. And it's not impossible that Christie killed him.
I still stand by.
Yeah.
Both of them were rightfully hanged.
Yeah, I think that's right. Certainly Christie. And I think Evans.
Certainly Christie.
So, all right. Well, look, we're interested to know what you guys think, especially if you're in England and, this is a story that's often very one-sidedly presented to you in Britain. So we'd love to hear what you guys think about this. Shoot us an email, prosecutorspod@gmail.com. Add prosecutorspod for all your social media. Join us on Patreon for only $3. You can get these episodes early and ad-free, or you can go to Apple if you don't want to do Patreon and you have no interest in seeing us record these. You can get yourself an Apple subscription. No ads on that either. So check that out. Read Death in the Air. Great book. Death in the Air, the true story of a serial killer, the Great London Smog, and the Strangling of a City. I think it's a very even-handed book. Presents both of these sides, gives you sort of the evidence on both sides, the weaknesses on both sides. I think both, if you want to know about Christie's murder, about Christie's murders, the Evans murders, and then also the really interesting story of the smog and the response by the British government. Great book to check out. Let me know what you think about it. Well, Alice, we've gone pretty long today, so I don't know if you want to answer a question or just sign off for now. It's totally up to you.
We can do a question because that was disturbing and weird. Whew.
That was weird.
That's one of the most bizarre.
I read that book and I was like, I got to cover this.
It is crazy.
It's really
all
good.
I could think about was the ride the whole time. I was like, but when does the bottom come?
I love that. I love that analogy. That's a fantastic analogy.
Well, thank you.
Okay, let's see. All right, this is from Grove Orange. True crime listeners have heard of many crimes perpetrated by individuals posing as law enforcement, fake arrests leading to abductions, etc. What right does an average Jane have to question a cop pulling her over or wanting to take her in for questioning? How should she verify the law enforcement officer is legit? Don't want to be seen to be resisting arrest. What would each of you do? What are our rights? Well, I mean, the simplest answer to that question is if you're getting pulled over, you can always call the police. Like you can literally always call the police and say, hey, there's a police officer behind me. They're pulling me over. I'm here. I'm going to pull over. I just want to confirm that this is a police officer. If you do that, you're not going to get in any trouble. I mean, that's one thing you can do. Now, practically speaking, how often are you going to do that? Probably not that often. I mean, obviously, look for all the insignia of the police. A police vehicle with lights and sirens.
And by the way, a car that is very well kept. So I have seen, in one of our interviews, I have seen a car before that looked like it had a sheriff's sticker on it, but it was like the hood was a different color. It was rusted through.
You can buy old police cars.
Correct. Yeah. Police vehicles will be very well maintained. Like you have to keep it washed like a fire truck, honestly, at all times. So if you see it rusted, scratched through in any way, not looking like a brand new car, and it's going to look very rough. It's going to look like it has a different hood. It has scratches and rust and paint coming off of it. And the sheriff's sign is like half peeled off, right? That's not legit. Because I think all jurisdictions, it's kind of part of how you maintain your gear, like your uniform has to look clean and maintained as well as your vehicle.
Yeah. So, look for all that. But once again, you can always, while you're being pulled over, Call the local police. Call 911 if it's a really weird situation. I mean, that would be the ultimate that you can always do. The other thing, it gets a little shaky here. Police, obviously, when they put the lights on, the sirens, they want you to pull over immediately. People will occasionally drive until they get to a public place and then pull into the public place. And the police will be like, why didn't you pull over? And
as long as you put your flashers on.
Yeah.
You
acknowledge
that you're not running. And don't hit the gas. I mean, don't hit the gas when you do it.
And I would say this, if you're on a deserted road and the police pull up behind you and turn on the lights, and I'll say this, a lot of these stories, number one, they're very rare. Now, occasionally, police officers are murderers. Nothing you can do about that. That's very rare, but that does happen. Usually when you hear these stories, it's like somebody's in a plain car and they're flashing their lights, or they approach somebody and just tell them they're a police officer in plain clothes. And just that you should always be very skeptical of. And just say, like, I would like to verify who you are, I mean, because remember, if someone's doing that, the whole reason they're doing it is to get you to leave with them without causing a scene. So they're not likely, if you say, I would like to call someone and verify this, they're not likely to cause a scene. They'll be in a situation where they're probably just going to have to move on to the next person, right? So, I think you be careful without being overly paranoid. And most likely this is not something you're going to do. Right. I was
going to say, because the premise of the question was that this happens all the time. I will say the impersonation actually doesn't happen all the time. And good impersonation happens even less often. But with all that said, I will admit, especially being like a woman who drives alone in dark country roads where there's like no lights or gas stations for miles, I think about it all the time. I'm like, okay, I'm driving right now and I know the next gas station is like 30, 40 miles away. What would I do if someone put on their lights behind me? I don't know that I would pull over on the side of like a 2-lane highway by myself. I would probably this is just me. This is what because I think about these things all the time, especially when we were doing all those interviews in really rural areas where there was nobody. I would probably put on my flashers immediately so that they knew I was acknowledging. I would go the speed limit or go whatever the regular was. Maybe even like drive half on the shoulder, just to acknowledge that like, I acknowledge you. I'm driving on the shoulder, but I'm not stopping. And I thought about, I may just go the whole 30 miles until like driving on the shoulder. So they totally recognize, maybe even drive very slowly. Like if it's a 70, maybe I'd go 45 and wait until the gas station to pull up.
I do think if you're going to do that, it's wise to call.
Oh, I would probably call along as well.
Hey.
Well, here's the thing. If someone were impersonating, they'd probably peel off and just leave.
That's true.
At that point. Because like I'm causing a scene by flashing my lights and driving on the bumpy, when they like do the whole wake up rubber. So like I'm actually causing a lot of a scene just doing that. But you can't accuse me of trying to flee.
I am curious, these impersonation stories, if there is one of an officer who actually had a police car with the lights and siren.
Yeah, I have not heard that. I have heard of like walking up to someone in an unmarked vehicle and then like being when they're saying like,
can I see your stop sign?
Yeah, can I see your badge? They're like, you don't get to ask that. That's resisting arrest. Like I can, but someone with an actual badge and an actual police vehicle with actual lights. I don't think I've heard of a real instance of that.
An officer who refuses to show you their badge is not a real officer. Period. You don't have to worry about resisting arrest if they won't show you their badge because they're not a real officer.
Including like FBI agents, like not your like beat cops who are in like the uniforms. If anyone comes up to you and says that there's some sort of an officer, they should have a badge and there's a unique number on it and they should be able, and you're allowed to look at it. And
usually when we're in interviews with the FBI, that's the first thing they do.
They put their badge and slide it across the table and you can pick it up and look at it. And it has their picture and it has some sort of like holographic seal on top that makes it difficult to copy.
Right. All right. Well, great question. Keep them coming. Leave a 5-star review. You can do that. All right, guys. Well, this has been fun. And I mean, has it? I don't know. This Christie guy. That's what y'all come for, right? Well,
the whole like everyone's clothes just fell off and their clothes strangled themselves is just wild.
If it weren't so tragic, it would be hilarious. Like his story is hilarious in a twisted, dark way. Well, next week we'll have a less gruesome, a less gruesome case. In some ways equally tragic, but I think you guys will enjoy it quite a bit. That's all we have for tonight. We'll be back next week with that story. But until then, I'm Brett.
And I'm Alice.
And we are the Prosecutors.
Let me check my sounds. Pretty good. Let me prop this pillow up a little better. It works. I can hear you.
Yep. Okay. I'm going to go live. We do it live.
I feel so much better today having not just gotten off a plane.
That's great. You look so much better, too. You looked terrible yesterday.
Thanks.
No, you looked great. You always look great.
Mean.
I was just kidding. You looked great yesterday. You look great today.
It's always, you look great. You always look great. It's actually wonderful when, I forgot I have my earrings on. So, I think we've talked about this. These are my travel earrings. Oh. I've been wearing them ever since I got hit by High Meth Lady after CrimeCon 2023, 4.
TV has thousands of free movies and TV shows.
You swear?
If I'm lying, I'm dying.
This is the mindset.
Free.
This is the mantra.
Free.
This is the mindset.
With movies like Interstellar, Dreamgirls, and Gladiator.
Are you not entertained?
And TV shows like Survivor, SpongeBob SquarePants, The Fairly Odd Parents, and Ghosts. Pluto TV is always free.
Huzzah!
Pluto TV. Stream now, pay never.